My name's Emma Taylor, and I'm the founder and managing director at Chief Disruptor. Thank you for joining us today at this Chief Disruptor Forum, focusing on delivering tangible results from enterprise-wide generative AI in partnership with SnapLogic. This is the latest in a series of lively, insightful, and interactive virtual sessions that have been designed to connect industry leaders, practitioners, and thought leaders, tackling the very latest need-to-know disruptive trends, adoption strategies, use cases, and tools. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who are perhaps joining us for the first time, Chief Disruptor is the community for disruptive business and technology leaders. Our purpose is to cut through the hype and to enable our members to leverage these disruptive trends and technologies through our member-led insight reports, content, and community activities. Today, we're joined by our panel of 3 experts who will be sharing their lessons on how to generate concrete results as you move from GenAI pilot projects to enterprise-wide programs. We'll take a look at some of the realistic successes and what success looks like and how to measure it. This session is about interactivity, so we encourage you to ask as many questions as you'd like. And of course, there are a number of future Chief Disruptor opportunities to continue this important conversation on AI. So we hope you'll join us for our next Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club, Harnessing the Power of AI, next Friday on the 22nd of November. And that just starts a little bit earlier at 8:45 UK time. So without further ado, let's deep dive into today's forum. If you'd like to pose any questions throughout today's forum, please use the Q&A function and we'll answer as many questions as we can. I'd like to welcome Natalia, Dominic, and Carl to this panel today, and to welcome them and to do a little bit of an introduction. Just to give a little bit of an overview, Natalia is the lead architect in AI at BP, Dominic, the enterprise architect at SnapLogic, and Carl, the group head of AI and digital at His Majesty's government, and also the all-party parliamentary group on AI, and a guest lecturer at University of Aberdeen, amongst other things. So a big welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us. By way of introduction, please could you share a brief introduction of yourselves and also your role or roles today? Natalia, may I start with you, please?
Yeah, I don't have such a long list as Carl, so I might be more faster. So I work at BP. I work in the space of enablement, AI, and accelerating. So bringing it to people, so which ranges from looking into new enterprise solutions which are featuring AI, to the ways to accelerate internal projects and build frameworks that can be reused by different business. And it's a global role. So it's a role that looks at all business units and is not limited to particular business, let's say people and culture, or really in my case, but it's like across the whole organization looking at the best practice. And as of last year, also I'm part of the governance team, which AI governance team, which helps bring solutions in a responsible and reliable manner. And we work really closely with a range of partners from legal, digital security, and digital in general. So it was a really interesting space for the last at least 2 years. Yeah, thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
So much, Natalia. Thank you. And for all of your involvement in Chief Disruptor over the years. Thank you so much indeed. Dominic, may I come to you next, please?
Absolutely. So I'm an enterprise architect at SnapLogic, working with some of our largest and most strategic customers around the world to make sure that they're getting the full value of their investments. I've been doing this sort of thing in enterprise IT for longer than I care to admit in public, working always with customers, always at the enterprise end of things, always on the vendor side, but again, with that customer focus to try and keep honest.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Carl, to you, please.
Morning. So from my perspective, so I'm running as group head of AI for a £4 billion government department function, call it what, an agency. The interesting part for me, I've been in a tech journey all my life, really, and what we're always talking about when it comes to AI as a topic for me is data exploitation and using techniques to exploit data. So I'm really keen to share some learnings and good stuff that I've got on my journey for that. But yeah, open to any questions and challenges and all that good stuff anytime. So yeah, look forward to this session.
Thank you so much indeed. And again, Carl, I know you've been very kind in all of the years of Chief Disruptor and getting involved. So thank you very much indeed. So let's get stuck in. Following the initial hype and excitement about the promise of generative AI and the subsequent race to test and roll out the latest GenAI tools, many business leaders are now more skeptical about their ability to deliver on this earlier promise due to a lack of concrete business results. And I think that's something that comes up again and again in this topic, is those concrete business results. And they're finding that it's perhaps easy to knock up a demo, but it's not so easy to actually scale it. So we need to have a look at that. How do we get that right? And how do we scale it at an enterprise-wide level? In fact, rather shockingly, I read recently that just over 1 in 10 enterprises have succeeded in scaling pilots into workable business models, and only 15% of enterprises have been able to derive meaningful bottom line impact with generative AI, having had so much hype with it. Is it perhaps inevitable that this disillusionment will set in perhaps as reality? Were expectations set unrealistically high? Did organizations jump in before thinking it through? So the question that I got for you, that first question of this forum to ask you all is, can you share with our audience the factors that you think have led to this cynicism about Gen AI, and is it fair? Dominic, can I start with you, please?
Absolutely. We have seen from analysts this problem with the failure of AI projects to launch. Depending on which analyst you talk to, you get different figures, but certainly it looks like around 80% of projects, the figures all tend to settle around that level, don't make it from a promising demo to actual production use and value. And the problem that we see is that, I mean, this has always been an issue with new technology, right? A cool demo doesn't always work out in practice. But this time, the gap appears to be even larger than in previous waves of tech. And what we're seeing is that there are 2 compounding issues. One is that it's so easy to get started. And so you can very quickly knock up something that makes everyone go, wow, cool, that would be amazing. And conversely, it's that much harder to actually get it working at scale because of the difficulty of getting hold of the data. You very quickly run into issues of, well, this is in some weird format, and that belongs to that department, and this requires special clearance, and it just gets too hard and too annoying. And so that's the big factor that's leading to this trough of disillusionment that I think we're starting to head down into, as people go, wait a minute, this is a lot harder. You promised it would be easy. Why is it so stressful?
Thank you so much, Steve. Natalia, I know when we spoke before this call, you had some views as well. So please, can I come to you for those?
Yeah, so I think I was sharing what we've seen at the beginning of the journey. People, as you said, became really excited, and it was a wider range of people than you would usually expect. So usually you have IT professionals looking at some demo and saying, oh, it's a cool technology, I want to use it. So this time it was much wider. So it was like almost all people, like I won't say our grandparents, but like, a wider range of people coming and saying, oh, it looks like a technology we should use because it's so cool. So what happened then happened really kind of flipping, starting not from the value and saying like, we have this problem we need to solve, but more like we have this cool technology we need now to use to solve some problem. So, and I think it's like, it's not AI problem, it's like a digital problem. If you start this way, not always you get the great results. So because you're not looking at the value you will deliver, but you're rather looking at like, that's a cool technology. And I think this is now flipping because we have more understanding what it can do and cannot do, and also the stack and everything developed. So I think now it's becoming healthier in a way that people, rather than saying like, oh, there is cool technology, they understand that it's not a solution for everything. It's not magical tool, and you need at first to see the problem, then research the problem and approach it in a old way to say, oh, is it the data engineering? Is it AI? Is it the GenAI? And GenAI becomes just one of the tools, really exciting one, yes, but one of the tools. And obviously, whatever Dominic just mentioned about how difficult it is to go from POC to prod, I kind of second it. It's not easy at all, and obviously it kind of creates this, like, you have all the hype at POC level, and then it takes another half a year to get. So it's one of those technical debt was never exciting for especially business people.
Thank you so much. Carl, coming to you, that figure of 15% of enterprises having been able to derive meaningful bottom line impact with GenAI, does that shock you?
Of course it does. I won't repeat exactly the words that Billy Connolly said, right? But 82.4% of all statistics are rubbish. So I just think there's a whole nonsense around that kind of stat, right? It's completely unique to every single organization on how much you get out of it fundamentally. And to pick up on the previous thread around cause and effect, I 100% truly do blame the media. We've all read the articles about, existential threat from GenAI, which is absolute nonsense, as we all know. And we really do know that, right? A word prediction model is not going to change people's lives to any detriment whatsoever. Firm believer in that. And it's a really big challenge for all of us. Look, GenAI as a measured, tangible capability for true benefit to business and individuals, right? That's the world we live in today. And ironically, it's the world we've always lived in. So for those of you who've got the vintage journey, we go back to anything thinking about the arrival of internet to corporates, true mobile device access for data back in the 90s, right the way through to where it is today in terms of smartphone usage. So fingertip access to tech is actually the cause of where we're at in this conversation. We all know this. Every single colleague that we work with, every single one of every demographic position is using GenAI on their phones, whether they like it or not, right? And that's a reality that we live in today. So we're in this interesting pivot point of those who can remember the days when we would go to our offices and our IT would be better in the office than it is at home. Surprise, surprise, today we're still in a world that our IT at home is better than it is in the office, right? And that goes for everybody. I don't care which business you work in, right? Worldwide, right? Even if you work in Microsoft, right? Your home tech's better than working in the tech firm, right? So that's the nature of the game. So we're playing this pace catch up, and the interesting dilemma we've got around tangible benefits and the trough of disconnection, I'd rather call it, rather than disillusionment, is the hype, the media hype. Exactly as Natalia said, the hype has been so strong around great things at pace, all the time, every time, always on, all that good stuff. The reality is slightly different, right? Now we need to manage that, and we do that within our teams, the teams I've been working with. So this whole piece now about really concrete benefits capture, trajectory, really surprise, because it's an IT-based program of work, capture those benefits, measure those benefits, and feed them back into the business. That's the only way to really look at this in terms of that capability.
Thank you. Perfect. Dominic, I know that you agree with Natalia because you said in our briefing call that you look at success and failure stories, and the ones that have tended, and the ones, sorry, that have worked have tended to be the ones where business came to the technologists and said, help us fix this, rather than technologists playing with their own new toy. Why is it that these types of initiatives are more likely to be successful?
Well, precisely because of what both Natalia and Carl mentioned, because if IT is looking for an excuse to use the tech, there's no guarantee that that's actually going to deliver business value, except possibly by a lucky accident. If it's domain-led, if someone has a question they need to answer, a need they need met, and then you start from that point, then there's a much better chance, I mean, of just knowing, what are we aiming for? How will we know when we got there? You'll know because the business says, yes, this is what I needed. This is what solves my problem. And that is, when it's harnessed, that's where the ease of use can really come in, because for the first time, business can truly be an equal partner with IT almost in doing this, because it's so accessible, the tech. If it's, if some enabling factors are set up, but the tech itself is extremely accessible. At SnapLogic, we had our Integrate event in London last week, and I led a workshop of 60 or 70 people. About half the room were SnapLogic users, existing users, but about half were brand new to it. So they're people who are interested in SnapLogic, that's why they were attending the event, but they were by no means existing power users. And we walked through 3 real-world use cases where they were using GenAI and prompting, but also working out how to feed data into the prompts, extract data out of what the LLM returned, and use it to answer, simulated but real-world business problems. And we had, everyone from individual data scientists to C-level executives in there. Everyone completed the exercise. It was a really positive experience. And that's what we see at scale as being the prerequisite for success. Get the business people and the IT people, the domain experts who understand the use case and the need, together with people who understand the tech and work on the issue together. And that's how you can actually get to value.
Thank you very much indeed. Is it also about the prioritization of use cases? In theory, you can apply GenAI tools almost anywhere in the business, but maybe this spreads leaders too thin. How should organizations prioritize which use cases to focus on? And how have you used a cost-benefit analysis approach to prioritize and to provide focus? Natalia, can I come to you on that one? How do we get to that prioritization?
So I just wanted to add, obviously, on.
Please,
I think
go
Carl
for it.
was saying, Carl was saying, and we need to measure it. I think the problem with GenAI also, and I will give you an example of Copilot. Everyone knows, Microsoft one. It's really difficult to measure, because it's so kind of it's an assistant and companion. So you need to have really organized experiments. And obviously in these 2 years, there were a range of organizations that conducted these experiments. But if you look at, for example, a typical organization that decides I would want to buy, it takes them a long time to understand what will be the impact. How would I actually measure the value? And there were a lot of these tools appearing just as part of whatever we use, sometimes for free, sometimes as additional kind of paid feature. And obviously it's all exciting, but it's extremely difficult to go back and measure. And as I say, irrelevant whether it's for business people or not. And it was really difficult. And the second point also Dominic mentioned, saying that in GenAI world, SMEs play much bigger role. So obviously in a typical AI project, you would always have this collaboration, and it would always be, that would be a huge difference between software engineering and AI machine learning, that SME will have to provide you some input. So it's not like you have a set of features you develop and then you come half year. No, you have this year. But in GenAI world, it's even more engaging. So it's almost like having this person there, and there are ways to make it more automated, but still you need someone to say, yeah, it delivers value, it answers correctly the questions, it's not hallucinating. So it's much more involved one. So those comments, and I come to my question about the value. So what we adopted, and obviously it's have evolving journey, it's looking at how feasible things are. So how easy it is, and here it can be a broad range of things, is it ethical, responsible, does it trigger any problems with security, do we have any problems with change management that arises, and a range of those factors which become is it really feasible to deliver this project? And then how much value it delivers. And I think the key was there to have quite a few people participate in this exercise of value, so it becomes more objective, because everyone has their own project they're really, really attached to, and it's really difficult to step backwards and say okay, yeah, let's assume this project is not mine and I don't have this value. Can we actually prioritize? But it's much more difficult, and I'm here super open, and I hope Carl has those answers to the questions. It's a really difficult one, because obviously you have so many different management approaches to how you prioritize and all that things. So I think we'll be learning more and more in the coming years how to work with this tech.
Absolutely. Carl, your thoughts then, please.
Yeah, so prioritization, simply put, I mean, common sense, right? Which isn't common. Fundamentally, it's around, pick your costliest functions, right? I'm going to be mean. I'm going to pick on legal, right? Legal is a very costly function for every organization, wherever you're working. So we've had some really interesting success, tangible true value to bottom line in terms of our overarching spend, not just in the spaces that I support, but also across government and private sector that I've seen widely put in play. It comes with risk, of course, right? You know, would you truly trust a basic GenAI model to draft you a contract without checking it? Absolutely not. But what you can do is draft it and then use less time of a subject matter expert to scrutiny and verify that output, right? That's a really powerful thing to do. So pick the costliest stuff first, right? I'm always a firm believer, if you're going to do a proof of concept, work with the most outrageous characters that you want to work with first. The most dangerous ones, you know, crack the biggest nut first, right? Because the low-hanging fruit is anybody can pick that off the tree, right? Let's go for the scary stuff, right? And then the other side to it, I think, it's really interesting because Natalia's, as always, spot on. Measuring value, I find interesting. We went down the co-pilot route in terms of trying to capture some of the value that is being extracted from use of co-pilot within an organization. If you are using via browser, for example, the co-pilot sort of web page, I'll call it that for the naughty phrase, it's free. So it's interesting when you start to talk about value when using a free tool. Well, it's free, so every single thing, if you do one thing once in 100 years, it's still going to have value, right? Because it's free to start with. So everything's a bonus, right? So there's an interesting concept on that. We're getting really into the sort of the three buckets of GenAI, right? You've got the free off-the-shelf stuff that is widely available. And I'm going to argue, even if you're paying your 20 quid a month subscription, it's still near enough free. It's cheaper than buying Starbucks every day, right? No offense to Starbucks, other coffee vendors are available. But I think the other side to it is if you look at, you know, hybrid systems where you're paying good prices for platforms to build GenAI, specific localized GenAI products on your estate, as it were, they come with a price, right? But again, you're building it once and you crack on with it. But then there's the bespoke stuff, right? Getting really into really good, deep, interesting, as I would call it, AI techniques, GenAI techniques. Not just large language models, but other techniques that are out there. As we all know, there are a trillion flavors of AI. It's not just large language models, right? But that bespoke part, that's really where, for me, it drops into the standard IT process conversation, right? Business case, build it, watch the true ROI and measure it. And exactly as Natalia says, and you said, Emma, as well, so many proof of concepts that are built that are gloriously juicy and do some nice demonstrators. What happens next, right? That's the big question, really. But we do, and I do look at it with my elite colleagues around those three buckets of off-the-shelf, hybrid, and bespoke. Get those in your mind around that, and I think you're in a very good place.
Thank you, Carl, so much. Dominic, I'd love to come to you with your thoughts. I'm keen to go on to AI ROI, but is there anything else you sort of like to wrap around what Natalia and Carl kind of just said?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the partnership comes in. So when I said earlier that the subject matter experts, the domain experts can get involved in the project, it's not that they take over the keyboard and drive. It has to be a true partnership because the IT technology experts are the ones who can advise on, you know, these two are both good ideas, but this one is going to be vastly more complex to implement. We should maybe start from the other one. Or these two things are technologically equivalent, but have you looked at the pricing models? There are some serious implications here. So IT is bringing a lot of value to the table. It's just that it's no longer gathering the requirements and then disappearing into a back room and coming back six months later and saying, is this what you wanted? And business going, kind of. It's just going to be a much more collaborative, much more iterative approach that fits also with, you know, modern ways of developing things where we do short iterative sprints rather than massive year-long death marches. And that is also what feeds into the ROI conversation, because it's a lot easier, instead of saying, you know, 5 years from now, when we've completed the glorious 5-year plan, there will be massive savings, versus saying, no, we're going to have a lot of milestones fairly close to each other, but each one, mixing my metaphors, but it stands on its own 2 feet in terms of a return on the investment and delivering something back. And then, yes, at the end you get the big payoff, but at every point along the way you can see where you are. And if necessary, this tech is evolving pretty fast. It's 2 years old, barely at this point. It's hard to remember sometimes, but this current wave of Gen AI is barely 2 years old. Where will we be 2 years from now? You can't have a roadmap that is rigid and inalterable. You have to be able to roll with the changes, take on board new capabilities that come around, and fold them into your model and go back to business and say, hey, look, when we said we couldn't do this, maybe now we can. Let's look at that again. And that's how you get to a solid ROI collaboration.
Thank you so much. So building on that, some of the challenges to
Emma, can I
Go
just
for
like
it,
add
please.
small like learning,
Please.
because we all like focus a lot like, and I think it's like super important. Like we said, SME needs to be part of the discussion, but I've seen also a really interesting another one. So like you have all the different ways of like coming with the business ideas and delivering value. You have like workshops where you can have these discussions, and I've seen equally what we said. IT has to work together with SME. SMEs have to work with IT. So what happens, like it's recommended at the really early stages of having these discussions, have some IT like AI person sitting in the corner and just like looking and saying like, think bigger. It's possible, like think out of the box, because people are really limited to what the knowledge. They don't even understand how much can be achieved with this technology, and kind of like pushing these boundaries can happen at really early stages. So I was part of myself like these workshops where people like, oh, I don't know, automate booking calendars. And you're like, well, maybe you can go much bigger. And I'm not saying you should have to, but just like open yourself and like, and being there and answering these questions straight away in this workshop. So like part of the group, like, is it possible or not? It's extremely difficult. It can be achieved either having this AI person or educating people. Educating people is much more difficult. So at least like have an AI person like there to ask questions early on and say, are we crazy? Or is it already possible? Or will it be possible? Yeah, just my
IT embedded in the business. Yes, what a concept.
your partner.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think as a community, being a chief disruptor community, that is that sense of who is the disruptor in the room, whether it's a physical room or a virtual room. We need them in the room, don't we? Some of the challenges to AI ROI have been mentioned. They've been raised both today, but also in previous research with chief disruptor members. And those issues that we've seen over the years have been data quality, as you can imagine, integration with existing systems, even silos, as you'd imagine. And I've read in a recent McKinsey survey that 70% of top performers say they've experienced difficulties integrating data into AI models. Come back to stats in a second, Carl. Ranging from issues with data quality, defining processes for data governance, and having sufficient training data. To what extent have you experienced these challenges? I think Natalia brought those up already, but Carl, to what extent have you experienced challenges, and what steps should organizations take to deal with these challenges?
Yeah. So, and just to touch on a point that was put by Dominic, is this just a quick reality check. GPT-4, ChatGPT-4, from OpenAI, that was released in March 2023. We're now in November 2024, and there has been no major shift in any of that, including the O1 model, which is I'm sure people have played with, which is fascinating. It is not a thinking model. Machines don't think. It is a reasoning model, so it shows you how it's working. It's very cool stuff, right? But let's just take a reality check. The hype in the press around pace of change is true hype. Let you be grounded on it. Do not be fearful of what's truly going on out there with many of the model changes and increases, including Gemini and Claude and all the other products. It's that piece about GPT-4 really is it's ancient in a technology speed world. It's not fresh in one sense. So it's a really interesting dilemma that we have about the media nonsense around pace of change and all the rest of it. It's actually not changing that fast. So we've got to sort of be realistic as professionals in the space to say, take a breath. It is March 2023 when GPT-4 went live. There is still discussions whether even GPT-5 will ever go live. All that good stuff, and whether it'll go O1, O2, who knows? It doesn't really matter. It's just product definitions, but it's a fascinating moment. In terms of data, which is the big money, right? I come back to what I said earlier on. My journey's always been about data exploitation using various techniques, drilling in, whether it's machine learning, call it what flavor you want, data analytics. For me, AI stands for augmented insights, by the way, because A, it's not artificial, and B, it's not intelligent, but there we go. We've got to live with that phrase now. It's a really fascinating bit. Data, I've got two interesting buckets of data to always contemplate. One is any data that is created by humans is full of errors. End of conversation. So we've got to, you've tangibly got to seriously consider that, the percentage, back to stats, Emma, of what is, how those errors manifest themselves when you start to truly get in there with really good, interesting data analytics tools such as large language models, right? That's really interesting. A lot of people go in there thinking, oh, my data is beautiful, and I've been trusting and making decisions on that data for many, many years over, for various reasons, whether it's investment or other scenarios from a government perspective, geopolitical stuff. Fascinating when you start to analyze vast quantities of data and you realize how erroneous humans are. And that's a wonderful thing, because we're all creative, sentient rascals out there running around this little blue dot in the middle of this cascading universe, right? It's fascinating stuff. And you keep that in your mind around human created data. Then the other side to it is machine created data. So I'm talking data that comes out of, sensors, operating machines, streaming live data from, in Natalia's case, drill bits through to drilling machines and all kinds of interesting stuff. That has also got a level of error in it. And it's this take away this concept that all data is 100% beautiful and perfect. 100% it is not. So that is, you'd keep that in mind. And if you can allow yourself to sort of visualize how that data will be processed by a model, whatever the model you choose is, and as I say, there are a trillion flavors of models, that really starts to allow you to get the chance to say, right, expectation management, right, a particular intangible benefits again, is what is the worst case scenario that we could get into here. That's good value, and that takes, ironically, humans to think that through. So surround yourselves with subject matter experts. We do a lot of output verification. I've even predicted in our organizations at some point there'll be what I call a chief verification officer. Outputs need to be randomly verified. So a little bit like the audit assurance process that many of us go through, is put a random verification subject matter expert into the loop. So when output is checked, coming back to Natalia's point about hallucination, which is really exactly what a model does anyway in one sense, but it's really fascinating, right? Get that data verification process in place and do it early. Allow the user base to understand that your outputs will be scrutinized randomly in a period of time. That's a really interesting thought. It does empower your audit and assurance and risk teams to be more important than they've probably ever been, which is a bit of a shame, because I'm a firm believer risk should be at the top of everybody's agenda, but there we go, that's my personal opinion. That's a really interesting thing to think about. Is this new chief verification officer, the CVO? But there you go. That's my little thought on that one.
No, that's brilliant. And I think something for us to look at. They've come up, haven't they, in more and more interesting job titles. I'd like to get on to ethical and security concerns.
I did have one thing to add there, which does actually loop into ethical and security concerns eventually. But I want to first, you're talking about artificial intelligence definitions, Carl, and I went to university in the last AI winter. And so our AI course wasn't actually called AI, because at the time that was, no, can't call it that. So it was called Artificial Minds instead, just to get through the marketing issue. But at the time, there was also this thing called Moore's Law, which said that density of transistors in a CPU would double every 18 months, which basically meant that the brand new gaming rig I bought at the beginning of my first year was tragically obsolete by midway through my second year. And unfortunately, being a student, I didn't have the money to upgrade it, and I was very sad. And that mechanism has since broken down, and we've gone in different ways with, we still get accelerating performance, but in different architectural approaches. And I think we're going to see the same with the models. We're already seeing a massive proliferation of models. So it's not so much that one individual model has turned into Jarvis and is doing everything for us. It's more that we have different models that are suited for different tasks. So we work at SnapLogic, we work with AWS Bedrock as this tool bench that gives us access to all of the latest models, and you can pick and choose what works for your use case. And there's a certain level of experimentation there to figure out what is giving you good results. And sometimes you get drift between different versions of a model, and so that's once again somewhere where coming back to the partnership between business and IT, that shouldn't be just at the moment of defining the use case and say, okay, now we've achieved what we set out to achieve, go live, that's it, now you're just a user, sit back and point and click. There has to be this ownership of the data, the control, the governance, understanding the lineage of where it came from, how recently it's been updated. And these are exactly the sorts of pitfalls that people stumble into on their journey from promising demo, where you just have your canned data, your simulated data, to having to deal with the messy real-world data, some of which is not entirely reliable, some of which just doesn't meet people's gut feel. If the machine, the supposedly 100% reliable machine, tells me something, oh no, I don't quite trust that. Maybe I am a petrochemical engineer of 25 years experience, and I know that drill bits don't do that. Whatever the sensor's telling me, the drill bit is not doing that. And now I don't trust anything the machine is telling me. And so you also need to have that factored in, the expert view of the data, both to give access, to keep it fresh over time, to cross-reference it with other sources of data to make sure that you have an accurate picture of the world as far as possible, even if individual data points might be off.
Thank you so much. I think we covered quite a bit during the first 35 minutes of this forum in terms of sort of what kind of challenges we're seeing when we do that move from prototype to scale, and how that's causing things to go wrong. And we'll talk a little bit about it before we finish, just before the hour. What is that sort of key takeaway, that key strategy from all of you, with all of your experience, that members should be taking and trying to enact in their own organizations? But let's move on, coming back to what Dominic was saying there, is to what extent are ethical or security concerns preventing organizations from delivering tangible results? I'd like to come to Natalia, because obviously your role has grown, as you described when you kindly did your introduction. What are we looking at when it comes to the extent of ethical and security concerns?
So let me start with the security one, because it's like more crisp one. So security one, obviously, I think there was a shift, and I'm trying to explain it usually to business stakeholders. You had your own black box. You could like keep it in a garage and like lock it and know what's happening, what goes into it, and how. Now you have this messy one that doesn't fit any storage room. So it has to be kept by, let's say, a big vendor, AWS. And also it takes massive amount of effort to develop one. So you can do it, and some companies do it, like if they have a huge potential. And and also, obviously we also saw quite a few open models released, but the ones which are considered still more powerful are the ones sitting on the premises of some big organization. And that means that you don't have much insight into what goes into the model. So it's not an open one, so you can't check what is inside. And it sits somewhere on someone else's infrastructure. And while working with a lot of our third parties, Bring AI and GenAI, we see different patterns of how they implement this. And that's why security has sometimes really a lot of concerns about how this is implemented, and whether those partners we are working with are trustworthy and verifiable. It goes back to all digital practices. So it's not about AI only, but it's about just digital. The only difference is obviously, and the huge one, these models can, in theory, improve with more data they get. So it's about being careful to understand whether you want to help a third party, a big vendor, to improve their model by supplying your data. And in many cases, the answer from a big company or big corporation, not really. I want my data to stay with me. And this is something to be aware of and to be checking. And that's where legal usually gets involved, and some other parties, like not only security, to check what happened with your data. Does it stay with you, or once it travels to that big box, it kind of becomes like part of it. About ethical ones, so ethical is like such a broad topic, and it has so many things. I think GenAI obviously triggered a lot of discussions about like we can do things, but should we do things? And it's a really difficult one. And I recommend you having someone who is specialized in responsible ethics to kind of like ponder all the research and look into these decisions, specifically when working with people's data. Some of the things you might not want to automate just because it's less reliable and you want to be true to your organizational motto of being responsible. I think it needs a lot of attention. So as I say, security, I think in a more crisp one, you have technical controls and you have checks you can do. Ethical one is, I think, ever evolving discussion that will never stop and has so many new angles appearing. Yeah.
And
And again, it's
happy
back to the
this discussion.
partnership. You need all of these people around the
Yeah.
table. It's going to be a big room.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
Dominic, just conscious of time, but could you give us sort of your viewpoint both on, well, sorry, on three things. So the security aspect and ethics and also governance. And then I'm going to come to Carl to try and put that trinity together.
Yeah, so the big thing is that once again, going back to a previous wave of technology, in the early days of cloud computing, we talked about shadow IT, when developers or marketing teams or whoever, they had a business need, it wasn't being met by central IT, and suddenly they had an option. They could just go and swipe a credit card and get a virtual machine or sign up for a SaaS tool or whatever it was, completely out of the control and the visibility of central IT in a way that was new and people weren't used to. They hadn't really factored it into their thinking, into their risk modeling, into their security profile. They had this idea that there was a firewall and there was an inside and an outside, and it was very clear which was which. And then suddenly there were holes being punched in it in every direction. And we have a little bit of that with AI now. I've started talking about shadow AI, as I talk to IT leaders a lot in my role. And all too often I hear back, oh yeah, we're investigating AI. We have a 6-month project. We assigned a team to report back. Yes, but people are just, going to ChatGPT and asking it stuff and possibly feeding it internal company data. Oh, they would never. I assure you, they would, they are, they're doing it right now as we speak. And so it's not a question of, I mean, maybe in some cases you can just ban it to the firewall or whatever, but even then, we have mobile phones. People are going to do these things. So once again, IT needs to engage, tech leaders need to engage and help make it easy for people to do the right thing. This tech is powerful, it just needs to be channeled in the right way, and sometimes the answer is, no, we really can't or shouldn't be doing that. But here are a bunch of other things that we can and should and will be doing, and we're starting to do them right now, not promising them a long time from now. And the good thing is that a lot of the factors that people see as roadblocks to AI, the data quality, the accessibility of the data, all of these factors, they're things that we've been talking about for ages. They're not new to AI. It's just that previously the people who were jumping up and down and complaining about them were back office people. They were data scientists, analysts, people trying to work with the data, especially work with it across departments, across silos, get some sort of unified view. And so in all too many organizations, it was possible to ignore them. And now with AI, there is this renewed pressure to do what I think everyone concerned knows we should have been doing. It was just, it was hard. It's fair enough. But the prerequisite to success in this new world is being able to get all of these things working together and get them into the hands of people. And again, with those safeguards and controls and observability of what's going on, so that you can intervene if you see someone is doing something they shouldn't be with personally identifiable information and so on. But again, there are ways around that. You have these open source models, so you can run it yourself in your own infrastructure and know that you're not feeding something to some other corporation that's going to do something out of your control with it. You can have more control. And you can have a differentiated model. You can say, the marketing chatbot, so that's fine if that uses a public model. It's not doing anything too terrifying. And then there's the stuff that, no, absolutely should not leave the confines of our environment, and you do that in a different way. There is no one-size-fits-all answer here. It's going to be tailored to individual use cases, individual requirements, but there are going to be some common factors, and the big one is just access to data, having that data fabric that you can just plug into, and now you can do stuff. AI and all the other stuff that you wanted to do and couldn't before. Everything's going to take advantage of this.
The 3 bits that I'll pick on are, as part of ethics, number 1, engage with your internal ethics squad, whoever they may be. Number 1, we have, surprise, surprise, in our awesome superstar squad, a very powerful ethics committee, ethics leaders, very, very smart at what they do. So we're fully aligned to that. And we obviously got our group-wide ethics AI policy mandate, call it what you will, way of working, thinking. And that's very good stuff, right? But it's ever changing. So, it's a fluid conversation at all times with different kinds of pressures from different parts of the organization. So, keep that in mind, which is really cool stuff. Second bit for me, it's a very simple mantra: ignorance of the law is no defense, right? So fundamentally, if whatever you're doing, if you're not aligned to your GDPR data protection and corporate data protection rules, will be tidy, is what I would say, because this is the time when that data exposure, not just to the model, but output from the model, is going to really bring scrutiny. Be careful what you find out, is all I'm going to say on that one. There are reasons why data has been sat in archives for the last 20 years and nobody's touched it, right? AI is going to allow you to exploit that dataverse for the first time ever in an interesting new novel way. And that's really worth considering whether you really want to run into that building, shall we say, or not. And then the last bit for me, which was touched on superb by Dominic, is the piece around data leakage. It's the singular greatest risk, and it should be on all of your organizations' number 1 risk register for tech right now. There are many great organizations like SnapLogic doing great things, but there are others out there who may not be as wise as Dominic and his team, who will literally ask you for data. Can you give me some sample data so I can create a little model and give it you back to play with for free? The reality is, as we all know, the big players have cornered the market, the suspects that we've mentioned earlier, in terms of power large language model platforms for GenAI. Nobody else is doing anything out there, whether they say they are or not. They are not developing their models because they don't have billions of dollars to spend on the correct kit, shall we say, to make that happen. So it's a really interesting dilemma. Do your due diligence on any organization that claims to have their quote own model. Really look very carefully, because they probably do not. I'm not going to say 100%, but highly probable they do not, right? So there's a lot of snake oil out there that's being sold. And then the second part to that is around data leakage. Take a good, long, hard look at your commercial contracts. We will, and absolutely everything's changed and changing, as always. It's interesting, if you work with any tech consulting professional service partner or whatever else, if you look at your contract, and you are offering data for that external third party to utilize that data in a particular project, whatever that may be. In the contract, we clearly state at the end of the project that professional service provider must delete all data that has been supplied by the prime to that particular professional service company, and have a nice day, tickety-boo. I challenge anybody who's ever audited that, by the way, but that's another story for another day. Here's an interesting one, is if I send data to a very large external professional service company and they use that data to train a little proof of concept model of some form to do some Fandango AI, GenAI stuff, what happens next? Once you've trained the model, you can't untrain it. And if you want to know the truth of that, I'd go and have a chat with J.K. Rowling, right? There's a reason why the OpenAI team have been sued for use of copyrighted content, right? And it's just, the law is that the processes that are happening worldwide now around the use of copyrighted IP content is a really interesting dilemma for the GenAI market, right? Data leak.
Right to be forgotten versus AI is a really interesting fight.
Very, very interesting battle. And I cannot predict how it's going to end. But, if you're going to say, look, I can't untrain a model, so what's happened with all of the data that we've released, whether it's real data or synthetic data is an irrelevance right now. The point is your partner has got your data format, and probably has a good inkling of some of the use cases for that. What happens next? Where does that proof of concept go? Which other organizations are going to see your data in a professional service company's demonstrator, right? Have a thought about that one, and don't be afraid of it. just get ahead of the curve, right? Get ahead of the battle and make sure contracts have changed in terms of data leakage into AI models. And the second part to it is just be open eyes as you go in. Once a model is trained, it cannot be untrained. It's a simple, basic process. Keep that in mind and you're in a good place.
Thank you, Carl.
I will
Right.
say that it's vanishingly rare in my experience in the sort of enterprise business world for people to actually be training new models. Most people are using existing models and figuring out ways to feed them with their own data. The good thing is that so SnapLogic, we already had AI features in the products. It was just, again, we were calling them something different. We called them deep learning and machine learning because it wasn't yet fashionable to be AI. But that meant that we were able to hit the ground running when this current wave hit. And we already have customers in production. So we started to see what this looks like in the real world. And the good news is, tangible results. So one customer reported 90% reduction in their platform maintenance costs because they're just able to let the thing go and process information because that's what it's good at. One of the examples being generating sample data, because it's hard to get real world data for very good and valid reasons. But you can say, can you give me 100 records that look like the production records? And that's exactly the sort of thing that LLMs are great at, but it's guaranteed synthetic and you can play with it to your heart's content without putting anything in danger. And that also helps productivity because you have fewer people sitting around waiting for approval. And again, we've seen 25, 30% reports of increased business intelligence productivity. And especially when it's led by the business. So we do a project SnapLogic on SnapLogic. American colleagues like to call it the dog fooding. We prefer to drink our own champagne. But it was our own finance department. They said, oh, we're talking about all this good stuff with customers. We have a use case. And okay. So we sat down and we figured out a way that we could use AI within their month-end closing cycle. And they were able to spend 90% less time reviewing contracts. Not that that's now a black box. There's still a human in the loop. As you say, you can't entirely trust what comes out of these things, but a lot of it's just rote. And it comes out and goes, yes, fine, go. And you don't have to waste time looking at it. But that meant 30% faster closing each month-end process, which is great for us employees. It's great for customers. It's great for everyone. And they found literally millions of dollars of revenue from doing that. And this is one of those fantastic things that was a hobby project for a half dozen people and massive returns because we had the data, we had the models, and we were able to just connect A to B in a way that works, in a way that was legal and ethically sound, and. So we have been a little bit negative, but again, it's not to scare people off. It's just say, there were good use cases, bad use cases, somewhat dubious use cases. It's good to know the difference. And some of them will be dubious for legal reasons, some for technical reasons, and some because the business case doesn't stand up. And that's why you need all of these different roles in the room when you're talking it through.
Just with only 5 minutes to go, I'm hoping that we can cover a couple of things. So we're going to do some quick fire, if that's okay. Coming back to some of those success stories, because I think it's important to look at the whole range from security to the challenges all the way through to the opportunities. Very quick fire. I'm going to rattle through some questions very quickly to you. Some of the successes, Natalia, that you've seen, you've got sort of stats and facts. And again, Carl, quick stats and facts for us.
Success is helping people to deal with the huge amount of information and saving loads of time, bringing tasks from something that would take a couple of days of a person to, let's say, okay, we won't say a couple of seconds, but a couple of minutes. And it was massive in some areas. I can mention maybe more details, but wherever you have loads of information. I think also, like another one to mention, you said data is not clean. GenAI can be really helpful to make your data cleaner. So it's kind of like what you just said. It's like drinking your own champagne. So it can help it to, so those were two. A second one is particularly boring. And usually people say, oh, it's not fancy, but it can be really helpful.
Thank you so much. Carl, over to you for some of those use cases.
That's simple. The biggest, juiciest, most pertinent to every single employee of every level is data explanation. Use the model to explain complex tasks, right? The most ooh-ah response that I get is when I show using public models like Copilot for non-confidential information, to basically explain a very complex piece of a document of science or whatever. And I tell the exec to use the prompt, explain this to a teenager, right? And if you take that simple, not just summarizing of the content, but the explanatory part of it, that's cool stuff, right? And that really gets that over the hump of going, now I get what it's on about, right?
Yeah.
And we all live in very, very complex environments, right? The people who believe they know everything and got all that to where, you know, to an expert level. As a great friend used to say to me, you know, experts built the Titanic, Noah built the Ark, right? So it's not that, don't claim it, use the kit to do that. That's really exactly as Natalia says, you know, get the summary, get the gist of what's going on at pace. That's a constant. And it doesn't matter which function I'm doing, whether it's finance, risk, legal, whoever, that's powerful, time saving, in terms of assimilation of data. And also what I would suggest, I'm going to give you a very quick one, is don't just use models to Q&A. Don't just ask questions and get answers about content and documents and whatever else you're researching. Use the model to create questions. So we use it a lot of dropping in certain complex pieces of information and saying, what are the questions I should ask about this content to a CISO, to a CFO, to a CTO, to a chief scientist? This is the kind of stuff that is really good and very interesting to do. That sort of gap analysis bit is very powerful. And we get a lot of benefit out of that part of it.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come on to a couple of quick fire again, just as we go through. So we know budgets can be tricky for AI. We know they can expand hugely. Very quick answer from Dominic. How do we make sure we keep those budgets on track?
Well, one is to make sure that it's aligned with the business case once again. So the business has some sort of notion of value, and as long as we're aligned with that. But that's again where the IT partnership comes in, because all of those different models, a lot of them have sometimes radically different pricing models. And so using one model versus another that give equivalent results in terms of the language output, they might cost very, very different amounts. And so once again, IT can really advise that. And that's, once again, the sort of thing where just really understanding the business case from both ends is key. But you have to keep up with the tech. We had one customer that we work with in Europe, and they'd been trying for 6 months to deploy an AI project. And they were stuck on the hard part. So it's always the hard part, is dealing with the unstructured data. Structured is fine, connect to the database, go. Ingesting a bunch of unstructured data in different formats was just stumping them. And we were able to, again, back to the build versus buy decision you alluded to at the beginning, Carl, we were able to help them with off-the-shelf components in literally 2 days to achieve what they've been struggling with for 6 months, to match the contents of the unstructured data. In this case, it was a bunch of contracts and PDFs, but they're all different formats and whatnot, with what was in their CRM. And again, identify revenue leakage. And that was very easy because there's revenue there to tie that back to, okay, we put this much effort in, we got that much revenue back. This project is good, it's in the green.
Carl, I know that we're about to close, but just your key takeaway that you feel that everyone should be thinking about as they go into 2025.
So, keep doing what you keep doing when it comes to GenAI, right? Keep testing it. I touched very, very quickly on what I class as Q&Q use case. I strong, just play with it, do that stuff with it. Do not put sensitive or anything above sensitive into your public models. Dominic's right about, trained models and training of models, but just be realistic. Any data that, and it's the same as using a Google search bar, right? You put it into a Google search bar. In fact, Google got more interest and insight and access to your Google search prompt than OpenAI with a ChatGPT prompt, or Copilot for that matter, due to scale and volume. But it's a really interesting dilemma. So just be sensitive on how you use it, but just keep using it and really, really, really have that debate. Play with the model as much as you can, and don't be afraid to try and break it. That's all I say. Have fun. Why not?
Thank you, Carl, so much for all of your involvement and insights. Thanks so much. And Natalia, just a very quick one, if you don't mind, for you.
I have one which was mentioned, but I think it will solve some of the problems. Educate yourself, educate your people. What we said about threats, about security, people don't understand it happens. They don't understand the risks. And one of the things, GitHub Copilot, if you have your personal license, like the model gets trained on your code, but people don't know about this. If Enterprise One doesn't do it, and people just don't know these limitations, and just like try to educate people, and it will help you massively on adoption, on security concerns, ethics. Just be on top of it.
Because we have got challenges, haven't we? We've got challenges around skills, challenges around people concerned about their roles, etc. And just a very quick view. I mean, as a very large organization, we've just had the UK budget come through. We've just had a US election come through. We've had lots and lots of change. We've now got Elon Musk working very closely with Trump, but lots and lots of changes. Just quick final thoughts from you and Dominic in terms that I'm going to come to Natalia more on the skilling and so on, but to Dominic more on that new tech that's coming through. In terms of that skilling and in terms of enabling teams not to feel too nervous in fear of this technology, what would you advise, Natalia, from what you've seen?
Again, education. So it comes like anxiety comes from not knowing things and not understanding things. And obviously educating yourself and not overhyping. Be realistic about what is an offer and be prepared. It will be changing constantly. We're in the age where things will be changing all the time because technology is progressing and it will be affecting. Just be prepared to learn and enjoy the process. I think that's how I would position it. Because I think from organizational point of view, be prepared that you might have to make technological changes as you go, and be open in terms of like architecture, the way you structure things, and the way you approach delivering problems. Like sometimes you have to close the whole project and say we don't need it anymore. So like being able to have these changes happening and preparing people that there is nothing bad about it. It's just different way of thinking.
Thank you, Natalia, so much indeed. Dominic, to you, when it comes to GenAI, as you said, it's only 2 years old, it's evolving all the time. How should we all stay abreast of continuing developments in this space? And what are the skills that leaders need to master or should be mastering to enable them to scale projects and to generate business impact?
Well, first of all, going back to what I was saying earlier about wanting to spend 6 months studying the topic and then make a considered decision, and that's a very reasonable and valid reflex. But right now, this is moving too fast. You can't do that. And it is, so deep, you could spend easily those 6 months and far more getting to grips with the tech. But it's not really something, unless you drop everything else, which is also important. It's not really something that most of us really get to do. So my approach, my recommended approach, is to treat it like any other tech, to try to understand enough what's important to you and rely on experts. Once again, not everyone is going to be training models. So do you really need to understand the deep mathematics that define the innards of your model? Or do you need to understand the inputs and the outputs and how it compares to other models for your use case? And so that would be the aspect that I would suggest to focus on. AI experts are expensive and scarce, and that's partly because we vendors, we already hired a ton of them. And so there are a few of them out in the market right now. But on the other hand, if you find a good advisor, consultant that you can work with, that you establish a level of trust with, they can walk you through that again to the level of depth that is required for your particular use case and question.
So much. So last thing to both of you, and to a huge thank you to all of you for today. So a final tip for our listeners on how to generate concrete results, something we've obviously talked a lot about in this last hour and incredibly tricky. So how can we generate concrete results as you move from GenAI pilot projects to enterprise-wide programs? So tell you your thoughts.
So I will just repeat what we've said and summarize. Focus on value, focus on business problem, and then look what technology is suitable. Might be not GenAI. Don't be overhyped and kind of try to do tick boxing like I use GenAI. And then I think also what we said, think about what if this POC succeeds? Do you have a path to production? So do you have funding? Do you have people? Do you have team? Do you have all this? Because we can have a POC, which is a brilliant one, but it doesn't have it doesn't fit the structure, doesn't fit the strategy, the overall. Just have this thought, even if you're experimenting, because otherwise there is no point of even starting experiment if it never kind of can see the light, even in theory.
And Dominic.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. And I would add, don't be caught up in thinking that AI has to look a certain way. Because this wave was kicked off by ChatGPT, a lot of people think it has to be a chatbot. But the current wave is that there are lots of values just by having it embedded as a black box somewhere far behind the scenes, just doing its thing. And maybe multiple things. We just launched at SnapLogic, we just launched our agent creator, which lets people build these AI agents that go off and do things. And the way they report back is usually not a chatbot type interface. They're delivering a function, they're being prompted, but they're being prompted as part of a flow of data, not by someone typing into a text box and asking questions. They're doing things like contract validation or what have you, but they're doing that behind the curtain. So when you're thinking of use cases, don't just think of the consumer grade things that we see out there. It's worth engaging once again with people who have been keeping up with the field and saying, hey, so what is the state of the art? What are the possibilities? What should I be thinking of?
Thank you so much indeed. A huge thank you to Natalia, to you. Thank you very much indeed to Carl and to Dominic. A really insightful, incredible panel discussion this morning. A lot that we've covered, a lot more that we could cover. But a big thank you also to our audience for joining us this morning and indeed for getting involved in the community as we move through into 2025.